we have no idea. We have no crystal ball, right? We don't know what Parks and Recreation is going to be 3 months or even 6 months or a year from now. Things may shift drastically given things, but it's also a huge opportunity for us. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about this, kind of looking at this as an opportunity rather than a big setback, which would be easy to do with all of the challenges that we have. Can you talk about some of the ideas about how we might not only bounce back from where we are right now, but also as we go forward, some of the things you think might be crucial for us to keep in mind?
Sure. I think the first thing that we need to look at and understand and appreciate is the game has changed. You know, the game has changed from a standpoint of just purely economics. There are going to be two or three or even four tiers of individuals who are coming out of COVID-19 or in COVID-19 and potentially coming out of COVID-19. There are people who are going to be affected, impacted by job loss,
Mm-hmm.
short-term job loss, midterm or long-term job loss. There are people who maybe have furloughed and are trying to recover a couple of months of dollars because they're brought on. There may be people who have had salary reductions, and there may be people who have not had any financial impact. And I think we need to understand that from a
Mm-hmm.
standpoint of how do we develop programs and services around that economic condition, and where can we find opportunities to serve, and also make sure that we can financially do it from our programs and services.
Mm-hmm.
With that, honestly, become with those four or five tiers of people, it really leads to, what is left in terms of discretionary spending. Do those folks have ability to provide, or excuse me, pay for youth soccer anymore, the dance program, the membership to the fitness
Mm-hmm.
center? Do you need to create a program around that? But I attended a session last week, I think, on a similar topic, and they talked about needs. And right now, a lot of our community folks don't feel safe, don't feel secure on that, and they can't really go to that next stage, old school Maslow hierarchy of needs and belonging, which recreation does fit into,
Mm-hmm.
until those needs are satisfied. So how do we manage that? And I kind of wrote a couple questions out to myself in preparing this. Is, how do we recreate the belonging if we cannot bring people together? How do we recreate the belonging if people can't afford it? So those are some of the opportunity challenges. Too often we just start throwing ideas out for programs, but don't really recognize the fact that we have that opportunity. We have to develop different programs for different needs and different market segments.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge construct.
Yeah.
The other factor that I think we need to look at is the fact that this COVID thing is going to be with us for a little while. And the impact of the COVID is
Mm-hmm.
going to be with us for a little while. I finally kind of gravitated to a thought over the course of the past week, is the fact that we keep thinking that, well, if we open our facilities, that's it and we're done. But it's not about that.
Right.
We're gonna learn more things about how this COVID-19 impacts our operation. And we keep saying, oh, well, in January we'll be all right because there's a vaccine. Well, we've got to realize that vaccine's got to be deployed to 300 million people potentially. And so it's not an
Mm-hmm.
instantaneous thing. And I finally told my staff that, the soonest that we're going to get back to normal with our programming cycles, our offerings, and that type of stuff is going to be the fall of 2021. And they were just taking back on that. And it is a situation where that's kind of a realistic timeline. So let's prepare ourselves mentally from a staff perspective on, we're in this for the long haul. Another thing that also
Yeah.
kind of has been piquing my interest is, how do we transform the Parks and Recreation experience, which comes into fruition a lot in my narrative. And I was on a call yesterday with Athletic Business, and one of the gentlemen who was on the call put it. He goes, the railroads did not transform their business model. And it was the lap of luxury to go across country in these beautiful carts, and then all of a sudden this airplane came. And
Mm-hmm.
so the statement that I want to make to fellow professionals is, we can't be that railroad. If we're that railroad and we're offering the same services today, and then we have this impact of COVID, somebody's going to come in and potentially take our market share. And that's a
Yeah.
huge aspect from that.
Well, and I think we do a lot of work where we're trying to get a handle on what should that transformation be. So, so what are some of the things you think we should think about as we're looking at how should we transform that experience?
I think we need to look at transforming that experience in, the program service delivery model. What are we focusing
Mm-hmm.
on? But we have to know what that customer wants. So if we're thinking that the customer is wanting safety, security, we use, and I've been saying to the staff, we need to make sure that they smell the clean. We're
Mm-hmm.
using the senses to convey that this is a safe and secure environment for the folks. And one of the things that we're kind of developing some models on is really two different types of program tracks. One of those program tracks is being our continued individual based programs.
Mm-hmm.
And by individuals, I mean one person registers for a youth soccer program, a youth ballet program. But the other model that we're working on right now is a cohort type of program. And so two or three neighbors get together and they all have kids the same age. Maybe it's 5-year-olds, maybe it's 8-year-olds, maybe they're all these are 8-year-old girls, and they would come together and register for a dance program. They would come together and
Yeah, that's
register for
interesting.
a softball program, because now as a consumer they are coming together to us, and so they feel safe in that unit. You see where we're
Right.
going
We've
with that?
talked a lot about, yeah, the bubble, people feel safe in their
Yep.
family unit. So a lot of times what we're doing is maybe family, and then the bubble starts to get a little bit larger the
Yep.
safer that we feel, and it may be the neighbor kids that we play with, or and just the idea of and being able to accommodate that rather than our historic model. Right now is we kind of throw everybody together.
Right, and the bad part of that is, you're only hanging out with those two families or three families, and that defeats the
Right.
process, or the purpose of recreation, which was to introduce you to new people, introduce you to new cultures and diversity and
Mm-hmm.
all that type of stuff, to see people out there. But at least for this 18 months, let's make sure that we're developing that service that they want. I see a lot more smaller class sizes. So some of the class sizes that we may have been doing 8 or 10, now down to 6 or 4 from a comfort standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of things going down to self-directed programming, where I'm going to learn it by myself. We're going to give them some outlines. It may be just information on a website that they can do. How do I do fitness? So if my
Yeah.
comfort zone is just by myself and I don't want to get to a group of people, but how do we provide them resources
Yeah.
to be healthy, be fit,
So
have wellness? I think there's also going to be a real big push, and we've seen this across the country, on more outdoor and nature-based programs
mm-hmm.
because of that
Mm-hmm.
elbow room. Not in the
Yeah.
recreation center, but in our larger tracts of open space.
I do see that, yeah, a big push towards anything that we can do outdoors. I guess you mentioned earlier a little bit about staffing, and I guess one of the questions that comes to my mind as you're talking about kind of these individualized programs, or programs on demand, or however you talk about it, can you talk a little bit about the considerations for staffing around that? How are you going to staff, and what do you feel is most important for people to have in mind as we're thinking of the needs of staff going into this kind of transformation?
Well, I think there's really two answers, two parts to that question. The first one is, how do we direct deliver that program service? Okay. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we have been very kind of somewhat forward thinking in is most of our programs and services are offered through a contract base. So we do a revenue split, 70, 30, 60, 40, somewhere in that range. We're also doing some virtual programming online and doing some similar splits as well. So again, attracting those folks, how do we bring them in? But when we talk about the full-time staff that we're here, the staff that we are, employing and paying on a per hour base or through a salary, the biggest thing, and I really think it's the toughest thing, I've really started to realize it over the last probably 10 days of the emotional, to some extent, baggage that they're carrying, of the
Mm-hmm.
weight that they're carrying right
The
now.
trauma. There's
Yeah,
trauma right now. It's like a huge,
and
yeah.
they're all dealing with a ton of stuff right now. One, they're trying to be good professionals and parks and recreation professionals and keep a good, positive face on it. But they're working through stuff at home.
Mm-hmm.
My mantra for my staff is bouncing back and staying back. How do we, we're taking a hit on some of our programs, but we can be there. We can be there.
Right.
We can be, high level provider of Parks and Recreation services, a relevant provider. But what we're doing can't look like what we did in January and February. We have to break the model. We have to break the activity down, and we're doing that. We just had before I got on the phone call with you, we're talking about our haunted house and our trick or treat trail. And they're like, well, we're going
Yeah.
to hand out candy. I'm like, you can't hand out candy. What are different ways you can hand out candy? What are different ways we can queue up people? How do we separate people? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, here's the option. You don't have it, or you do this.
Right. Yeah.
And if we don't have it, my point more than anything else to you and others that are listening to this, somebody else is going to fill that gap.
Yeah. Which is, in some ways that shakeup may be okay because
Yeah.
it allows us to, if somebody else can fill that gap and they can do it in an entrepreneurial way and we don't have
Yeah.
to use tax dollars for it, yay. I kind of go, that might be a benefit of the shakeup if we can actually start to really focus in on our core mission and allows us to streamline because we've been doing so many things for so many people for so long that it really has us come down and look at, what is the focus that we should be doing at this point in time and what are the opportunities around that?
I think you're absolutely right, and that's kind of been our credo of not necessarily stay in your lane, but what are people looking to us to do?
Mm.
And we know we've got a lot of fitness providers in our community, and so why should we be doing fitness?
Right.
We
Yeah.
know that nobody can top us in outdoor recreation. Why? Because we got all the parks, we got all the open space.
Right. Yeah.
But
Exactly.
those are the things of, so we've really identified, and maybe this is a time, as you were just mentioning, to re-identify what are your 4 or 5 core areas of service that your
Hmm.
board is comfortable with you, your city council is comfortable with you doing, recognizing that there is a tremendous, especially I'm not talking rural communities in the middle of nowhere, but when you start getting into your urban areas, suburban areas, first, second, third rings out there are other providers out there, for-profit providers. And I have no problem with for-profit providers or even other nonprofit providers saying, "Hey, this is what we do." We have a very, very complementary aspect with the YMCA's in our community. We work together. We loan each other equipment for various special events, and we know they're really experts at this, and we're really experts at this. And because we contracted our programs over the years to focus on what we're really good about, what we have passion about, and they did the same thing.
We have a variety. We use what we call a public sector services assessment to go through and we have a lot of agencies right now really looking at which programs and services should be the core service versus what should be partnered or divested and having it's sometimes in some ways this little giving us time to stop for a second and go, okay, we've been doing what we need to do, doing, just kind of on the treadmill every year in the next program cycle. And all of a sudden there's an opportunity to go stop. We've got to make changes anyway. Now might be a good time to really strategically assess what we need to do going forward. And
Right.
so in some ways, the forward-thinking agencies are really looking at this as an opportunity to go, okay, we don't have to do things the same way anymore. We can really reinvent in some cases, and some keep what's good, what's working, and then reinvent the areas that may have been challenged already and are really coming to light that we can do.
There's a statement I use a lot is really, really difficult times, financial times, are the opportunities to make those critical decisions.
Right.
And sometimes they can be very much easier to make because it's a yes or no situation. Either you survive or you don't survive situation. Back in 2007, when we were, right soon after I came here, the board really wanted us to look at the what we might call the deficit in recreation or the subsidy in recreation, and it was like, hey, we're gonna do this, or we're not gonna do this because we've got to find programs that are of value financially and service first and foremost, versus just that were of service,
Right.
and cut out those programs and kind of what we called about going from a womb to tomb service provider to more of just a focused area, recognizing that there are some great providers in our communities And we don't need to duplicate the service unless the market demands are out there that are so high that need a second, third, fourth provider of that same service.
That's very interesting. Well, I appreciate that. Just in looking at, if you had a crystal ball, are there unique, what's the best program idea or the best idea that you've heard from your colleagues in terms of something that might catch on or is new that helps us as we emerge, as we start to
I don't think it's the, here's a hot trend. I think it's the reformulation of some of our programs and services, kind of like what I mentioned, that, cohort program. How do we restructure, repackage to address the safety and security needs? I think that's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see, and to that, we're starting. I know a lot of communities are fooling around with some, like the esports and that type of thing. We're looking into that because we were looking into that before this, because that's just a natural. And I remember I was doing a presentation one time and I was talking about esports, and the gentleman was like, "Oh, all the kids are inside and just playing esports." I'm like, "Well, isn't that a good thing?" And then he was just taken back, and I'm like, "Are they not socializing? Are they not doing it as a team? Because there's like four people working together and they're communicating." And so I said, "Yeah, they don't get the physical benefit, but they're getting the social benefit. They're getting the cognitive benefit. They're working as a team, et cetera, et cetera. But there is value in esports and gaming from it. Maybe not what you like, but still there is a value there. And so how do we as public parks and recreation, focus on that?"
Yeah, I see, this whole idea that a lot of the kind of trends that were happening are being accelerated. I mean, we've had a lot of these technologies around, and we've been a little bit slow to adopt them because we had so many other options. And now I see some of the things, like esports is a great example, where it truly is all of a sudden, it's like, wow, that is something that we can really help develop now, and we have time to do it, which is an interesting piece. As we're, instead of kind of mourning, "Oh my gosh, I have to give up XYZ," take it as an opportunity to go, "Well, that's not going to work here for at least the next 6 to 18 months, who knows how long, but we have time to develop some of these other ideas." And since we often offer things that we don't know if they're going to stick or not, we don't know popularity of trends, but it also gives us a way to try out new things, and people seem to be much more accepting of the technology. Everybody's kind of moved ahead. I mean, now everybody knows how to do a Zoom meeting because their grandkids are getting the grandparents to do it, so it becomes much more accessible. Whereas before they would have just laughed at us if we asked.
Well, I think the accessibility question too with technological infrastructure is also the fact that it is, if you remember back, probably in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I was in Colorado at that time, and I remember Foothills was very much of a leader. Foothills Parks and Recreation District was very much leader in online web registration. And at that point, they were getting something like 40 or 50% registrations, which was phenomenal. But it's like, hey, listen, there are people still without a computer. This is 2002, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. But we're well past those days now. And not to say that everybody, does have a computer, and we know that there is still a challenge with the digital divide in the nation. However, a lot more have access to that. We all like the fact that I can touch and I can go buy pretty much anything from motor oil to a new cell phone to workout gear on Amazon in 3 clicks. And that's the experience that, not only as a result of COVID, but, just the market demands now for this. How do we do this? And we continue, and we struggle with it. Not everything that we do is perfect. It's not all peaches and cream in the Woodlands, but we've got to be continually to bring these questions up, continually to be asking these questions about how do we improve that customer service experience, COVID or not COVID.